Can fictional stories meaningfully depict bravery? This is a question that's been recently nagging me. No matter the emotion, concept, or subject matter, I've always been able to explore it in a fictional work, even if it's taken me a while to find the right story to do so. Whether it's something abstract like the nature of justice, or something more grounded like the depiction of Korean life in the 1980s, one can learn and draw life experience from simply consuming and meditating on art. But out of all the emotions that I've experienced in fiction, I have found the feeling of secondhand courage or bravery as one of the most fascinating ones. Secondhand emotions usually occur in understandable scenarios, such as feeling tense during the climactic scene of Aliens. We feel fear in that scene because, like Ripley, we understand the implications of Newt being left behind on the base. She's either going to be brutally impregnated by a xenomorph, or she's going to be blown to smithereens. One person against a physically and mentally demanding scenario, with a good old ticking time clock added in there too, equals a very natural tension for both the characters and the audience. Or for a more positive example, we get secondhand emotions of joy when two people fall in love and are implied to live happily ever after. If we like the characters and have seen them successfully develop as people enough to be in a place where they can have a healthy relationship, then we get to share in their happiness. I think it's pretty inherent, even if you're a curmudgeonly Brit like me, to enjoy seeing other people happy. Basically, what I'm saying is that many well-written stories give us relatable characters who we become invested in and then feel emotions on behalf of. We don't always feel the exact same emotion the character is feeling, and in fact, the writer can intend for us to make a quite different emotion come out of a situation, but we feel nonetheless. An emotion, however, that I find harder while experiencing a story is bravery. Tell me, dear viewer, have you ever watched a fictional depiction of bravery and really shared or learned something in that bravery? Is it possible to really feel brave alongside a character in the same way that you can feel their pain or their happiness? This video is going to be my armchair attempt to explore the philosophical concept of bravery, and I will attempt to answer the following question. Can fictional stories meaningfully depict bravery? Now, I got some help with this one because I really wanted to see what others thought of this topic. I asked some of my more abstract thinking friends and family what their thoughts of bravery in fiction were, and it really helped me to shape this video and explore this idea outside of my limited perspective. You'll see me quoting them throughout this video, and I'm really thankful that they were able to help me out. But without further ado, I'm John from the Author's Anvil, and I hope you enjoy the following essay. Oh yeah, and I guess this is my face reveal video? Of course, we must first attempt to define the elusive feeling that is bravery, or at the very least offer a definition that can be followed along throughout this video. Like most feelings, bravery is hard to precisely define. I not only consulted various dictionaries, but I also consulted my aforementioned fellow abstract thinking friends and family members to see if there was any general consensus that I could work with. The Cambridge Dictionary says that being brave is showing no fear of dangerous or difficult things, but I think there was a lot more to dig into there. Is bravery simply then doing something dangerous without being afraid, or just not externally displaying that fears for others to see? When I asked my friends, family members, and peers what they thought, I had a whole myriad of answers, such as the following. Bravery is attempting something that either pushes you out of your comfort zone or threatens your well-being, whether successful or not. Making a moral choice with the understanding that it will have grave repercussions. Being afraid and taking action or resisting the fear anyway. Feeling afraid and overcoming that fear. Facing danger, fear, or overwhelming odds head-on, often putting others' safety or well-being before your own. Courage is an antithesis of fear, for which we move towards/against it, despite of it. I find all of these answers much more satisfying than the Dear Cambridge Dictionary. Although there are nuances to them, I do think that there are some common threads for us to pull here. Of course, we have the sense of danger. You must be in a difficult situation that threatens your well-being, whether that's physical or mental. The other common thread that I found while interviewing was this sense of overcoming the fear. Unlike what the Cambridge Dictionary says, to be brave, it seems as though you must be afraid and experience some kind of triumph over it. To quote George R.R. Martin, "Can a man be brave if he is afraid? That is the only time a man can be brave," his father told him. With this logic then, one can only call someone brave if that person has honestly confessed to being afraid in a scenario that is frightening to them. For example, many people are afraid of spiders, whereas I'm not. If I catch one in a jar and then I go and release it out in the garden single-handedly, someone might describe me as brave, but this would be incorrect, because I myself was not feeling when performing that act. Now, if I managed to get through the entirety of Wallace and Gromit and the Curse of the Were-Rabbit without running from the room, then that would be brave, because Wallace is the most horrifying creature to ever walk the cinema screen. Let's dig a bit deeper into this idea of overcoming or conquering fear, as if it's a physical force that we must battle against and win. A battle that we must go into, I'd agree, but I don't agree that winning must be the end point. I'm a huge advocate for the honest, authentic attempt, that just trying to battle against fear is enough to be called brave. Overcoming a phobia often involves controlled exposure therapy, where the person experiences a small dose of what they're afraid of to learn and regulate their body in a positive way rather than in a panicked way. This takes a long time, and it is unfortunately not a steady line of progress. People attempting to overcome phobias will have great days where they nail it, and then other days where, even with the smallest trigger, they break down. I personally think that even on those days where you break down, just intentionally exposing yourself to your fear still makes you brave. This leads me to our second hurdle when we're trying to define bravery. Is bravery an act? Is it a feeling? Or is it both? I lean towards it being both depending on the context. You can say, I'm feeling brave the moment you're about to do a skydive, and then someone on the ground could look up at you with the knowledge that you're scared of heights and say that what you're doing is an act of bravery. For the sake of my definition, I'm going to phrase it from the lens of the feeling, because I think that's harder and more interesting to attempt, especially when we start to look at it from within fictional media. So, with that in mind, I'd like to offer this definition of bravery going forward for the rest of this video. You may not agree with it, but I hope you can at least tolerate it for the sake of us being able to continue in this exploration. Bravery is the attempt to overcome a situation that one personally finds challenging or scary. I think this definition does a pretty good job of everything we just talked about, and it also addresses a third and final problem when talking about bravery, it being mistaken for heroism. We might see someone performing an incredible feat to save other people and think to ourselves that they're being brave, but with the description I've just given, this wouldn't be the case if they didn't find the situation frightening. To be clear, even if they're not scared, what they're still doing is amazing, but I would say it's heroic rather than brave. If you think about Superman saving someone from a falling building, then, that's incredible and everything, but it's not being brave because Superman is Superman. He's not in any danger himself. Okay, one more thing before we get going. Last thing, I promise. But I want to be clear that in this video, I'm only going to be dealing with the good or positive depictions of bravery. I fully understand and I fully agree that bravery is actually a morally great thing, and that unfortunately it can be used to commit horrific acts as well as heroic ones. But for the sake of this video, I'm just going to be focusing on the more positive side to it. Right, that is all, my squires. Let's dig into some arguments. So let's first explore the case against brave depictions in fictional media. The central argument that I found here is the idea that there's a complete disconnect between the bravery that the character is feeling and what the audience member feels. I briefly touched on this earlier, but let's grab an example or two. In the climactic scene of Silence of the Lambs, we have Clarice Starling going through Buffalo Bill's basement on her own. The tension is brought to new heights when Buffalo Bill turns off the lights, leaving Clarice blind and stumbling. Now, in this moment, the audience is indeed sharing an emotion with Clarice. Here, we know that Buffalo Bill is near and has night vision goggles to hunt Clarice down, and we know exactly what he's going to do to her if he catches her. We feel tension or fear for this entire sequence, all the way up until the moment she shoots him. And then I'm guessing that most people's reaction to this moment is a mixture of relief, satisfaction, and happiness. Again, probably the same as Clarice. However, if we rewind back to the fear sequence, there is something else that Clarice is feeling throughout the scene, and that is surely bravery. Yes, it may be foolish bravery driven by a desire to single-handedly catch the killer and advance her career, but it is bravery nonetheless. I imagine this isn't felt by most audience members simply because of two reasons. First of all, while we do indeed feel tension and fear alongside Clarice, there is a part of our brain that recognises that we are not in actual danger. We therefore don't need to feel brave as we are not in Buffalo Bill's basement with her. We are at home or at a home theatre. Secondly, as I just described and explored earlier in the video, there are many different sources of bravery that can come from within a person and can manifest in different ways. I personally do not share Clarice's ambitious drive to become an FBI agent, so it's hard for me to relate to that emotion in precisely the same way. Now, you may point your finger at me and say, but John, surely with that argument you can't empathise with any character who exactly shares your traits and your feelings. And my response to that is simply the degree to which I think certain things are generally felt. I can feel fear in this situation because the idea of being chased by a serial killer in a dark basement is a very understandably and universally felt fear. I think everyone would be at least a little bit tense in this moment. What I don't think everyone would feel, however, is the specific brand of bravery that Clarice feels. While I understand it, that doesn't mean that I feel it or draw any deep meaning from it. I don't think I'm the only one here. But to continue. The further problem that fictional stories are faced with when depicting bravery is how internal that feeling of bravery is. This is more a problem for film and TV, as a lot of this comes down to how skilled an actor or animator is, and how skilled the director is at basically capturing that emotion. In a book or graphic novel, we're often told how a character is feeling and how scared they are through very specific descriptions and/or internal dialogue. When the character then feels and does something brave, it is much easier for us to connect with them as we have more of an understanding of how big an obstacle their fear was. The subsequent act of bravery is often also much more realised, as again we are given clear descriptions of what the character is experiencing. In film and TV, however, the writer has a much harder job, even when we have internal narration from the character. Absolutely, actors and animators can depict fear, but conveying that transition or simultaneous feeling of bravery is a much more difficult task. We see acts that we might say are brave, but given what we discussed in the previous section, is it really bravery if they're not sufficiently frightened? And is it really bravery, or are we just confusing that with heroism? And then there is that meta argument too, of how we, the audience, know in the back of our minds that the character has a writer pulling the strings for them. Yes, you could apply this argument to other feelings and feats that are depicted in fictional media, however those other feelings are much easier to grasp. For example, when we see Andrew Neiman do his epic drum solo at the end of Whiplash, it makes complete sense that he's able to pull it off because we've watched him practice so much throughout the film. Logically, we understand the impact that practice and determination can have on a skill such as music, so it is very inspirational watching Whiplash because Andrew's achievements are much more tangible. Another example would be us watching two characters fall in love. While love is a very abstract thing that is hard to describe and properly articulate, when we have two characters who've been sufficiently written to be compatible with one another and find each other both physically and emotionally attractive, it is easy for us to understand and find a meaning there. But bravery is such a deeply personal thing, and it's something that's not outwardly articulated necessarily. When characters fall in love, they tell each other, they kiss, or they do other fun stuff. However, I struggle to think of fictional instances where we have a character say something like, "I'm feeling brave now," as they face their fear. As I keep banging on about, it's easy for us to pinpoint a character performing heroic acts, but it is far more elusive to judge the degree to which they are being brave. A writer is pulling the strings of how brave to make the character, and that is simply not applicable in real life. And even if a fictional story is meaningfully depicting bravery, surely it's still better for us to just seek out real life examples. People like Oskar Schindler showed and still show equal amounts of heroism and bravery to this day, and they don't have a writer pulling the strings for them to make them brave. It seems then that my quest to find meaningful depictions of bravery in fiction is pointless. Or is it? So let's move on to the other side of the argument. First, I want to offer a counter to the idea that we can only find bravery in real life. I talked just now about present and historical cases of bravery and how one can draw meaning from them. Now, one of the people who I interviewed for this video pointed out something very interesting. How often we idolise and sensationalise acts of bravery when looking back into the past. Historical study is nearly always corrupted by propaganda, personal bias, or simply people misremembering things. In the modern era, we have the ability to capture visuals and audio in much better ways than back in the olden days, but anyone who's browsed 4chan for more than 5 minutes knows that even these sources can be manipulated or misinterpreted. The same is unfortunately true of acts of bravery. I'm not doubting for any second that there are people in the past and that there are people right now who demonstrate bravery and have committed heroic acts. However, we must always be wary of the precise accuracy of those events. And just like what we talked about in the previous section, it is still very hard to determine the amount of bravery someone was feeling when facing their personal challenge. Really, what I'm saying is that it's just as hard to quantify bravery in real life cases as it is in fictional media. Sure, you might have the opportunity to directly interview someone who committed an act of bravery, but they may not be a great communicator, or they may have their own warped perception of what happened. With fictional characters, on the other hand, we can find cases where we are right inside of their heads. Books or graphic novels, as I've already talked about, written in the limited first or third person, give us a direct, unfiltered insight into the mind of the character. That is, if they're not an unreliable narrator, of course. Yes, fictional characters have the advantage of a writer pulling the strings of their bravery, but I'd argue that this is in some way closer than what we could get in real life, because the author has given us that objectivity. We can look at the words on the page, reread them, and find out what the intention was behind them. Now, this argument definitely lends itself more to books, graphic novels, and I guess a lot of anime. However, the purpose of this essay was to determine if bravery can be meaningfully depicted in fiction, and well, those mediums definitely count. Also, I mentioned earlier the difficulty of a live-action actor or actress being able to adequately portray the inner desire to be brave and combat fear, and while I still stand by that statement, I'd like to stress that it is still possible. Clarice in Silence of the Lambs is very clearly terrified in this scene. We can see her hands shake as she holds the gun and the wide whites of her eyes, but given that she carries on through the basement and doesn't run away, we can clearly see that she is being brave as well as heroic. My last and perhaps most important thought on the case for bravery in fictional media is being able to see the positive impact of heroism and overcoming challenging situations by proxy. What exactly do I mean by this? Well, I think we can find bravery within ourselves by looking at the heroic actions of fictional characters and seeing the positive effect they have, even if the character themselves is not being brave. A personal example for me would be Guts from Berserk. For those who don't know, Guts is the main character of Berserk, who is a 7-foot pillar of manhood that wields a giant sword to slay demons and worse. Now, some of the situations that Guts is put into, I think I would be personally quite terrified in. The monsters of Berserk are rather horrifying, and the world in which the story is set is very bleak. But Guts is rarely shown to be afraid of these monsters in this dark world. Being the character who he is, he just stays calm and does what he needs to do in order to survive or protect his loved ones. Given our definition of bravery, Guts isn't a brave person because he doesn't have much fear. However, his acts are still inspirational because they are heroic, and they are heroic acts in challenging situations, and that inspires me and probably other readers too. Now, I know it's unlikely that I'm ever going to have to fight demons or be in Berserk's world, but I can still find meaning in that because there is that positive impact that I can see on screen or in the page. Seeing Guts' feats in Berserk inspires me to enter that inner conflict against fear because his story demonstrates the logical positive consequences of being brave. I think this idea is very compelling because it doesn't matter if we can't measure the degree of a character's fear, and it doesn't matter what their actions are being pulled by a writer's strings. What matters is that we can find a reason to be brave by watching heroic actions and the positive consequences that come from them. And they don't need to be as dramatic as watching a hobbit carry his best friend up the side of a volcano. Actions like Comey from Comey Can't Communicate, trying to make a friend feel better even though she has crippling social anxiety, are heroic even if the stakes aren't high. I imagine a character like her can inspire other people with that mental disorder to do similar actions, and that is just rad. And after all, isn't one of the main reasons why we tell stories because we want to inspire ourselves and others? I definitely think so. So there were mixed responses when I posed the central question of this video to my friends and family. A few people gave a flat out yes, of course, to the question, saying that bravery was just like every other emotion depicted in fiction, while a couple of other people said no. Fictional stories can only depict the concept of bravery and not the real thing, as there's such a disconnect between what the character is feeling and what the audience is feeling. Ultimately, the answer rests on you, dear viewer, but given everything that we've talked about, here are my personal closing thoughts. The concept of bravery is undeniably one of the hardest emotions to define, explore, and depict in both fiction and real life. While we're very good at meaningfully depicting fear and heroic action, the bridge between those two things is quite murky, and we often don't outwardly express bravery in the same way that we do with other emotions. But at the start of this video, I was arguing whether any kind of fictional media can meaningfully depict bravery, and I think it is at its strongest when we have a direct challenge to the character's head, such as in a book or narrated TV show or film. Yes, characters are often unreliable narrators, but when written in third-person omniscient, the writer does give that actual description of their fear and the desire to overcome it in as close a form as I think we can get. Fictional stories may not be able to meaningfully depict bravery, however, at the very least they can inspire bravery within us, which, in my humble opinion, is just as valuable and just as wonderful. Thank you so much for watching this video, and thank you to everyone who I contacted who gave their thoughts on this topic. It was super helpful. Just as with everything in storytelling, there's a lot more to say here, and I'm sorry that I didn't cover anything in terms of advice for writing bravery, but the goal of this video was really just to stimulate discussion and hopefully at least make people aware of the challenges that come with writing this topic. I'm also only just coming to grips with this theme myself in my own work, so I feel as though it'd be a bit disingenuous of me to offer advice when I'm still grappling with it myself. But who knows, maybe when I'm a little bit more confident, you might get that video. Until then, I hope you enjoyed this philosophical ramble. If you have any great examples of bravery being meaningfully depicted in media in the way that we talked about in this video, then please let me know in the comments. Regardless, if you want more fictional musings for your curious soul, then I would recommend you check out the rest of my content. Subscribe, and have a great